Question 1. After conducting a task analysis, your supervisor designs the following chain. Open fridge, grab ingredients, toast bread, put ingredients on bread, slice sandwich, eat. If you were conducting a forward chain procedure, when would you first reinforce the client? At first glance, this looks like an easy question, because it is. A lot of people say, well, the test is hard. I don't want to study easy things. I don't want to study easy questions. In my experience, people who fail the exam, especially multiple times, and people who I tutor and help, struggle with the basics. They focus too much on what we consider the hard stuff, quote unquote. They forget about the basics. The exam is testing you on all knowledge of ABA across the spectrum, meaning you need to know everything from reinforcement, punishment, task chains, to things like IOA and compound schedules of reinforcement. That doesn't discriminate. You have to know everything. Don't skip the easy stuff thinking it doesn't matter or that you don't need to relearn it. Trust me, you do. It's actually more important because you want to get these questions on the exam right. The easy questions you need to get right and you need to get them quickly. It buys you time. It saves you mental energy. A lot of good comes out of being able to answer a question like this very quickly. If you're sitting here and you forget what a task analysis is, or you forget what a forward chain is because you haven't studied it in a while, that's an issue. It's an easy question. That being said, let's answer the question. So we're looking at a forward chain procedure. When did you first reinforce the client? Well, we know in a forward chain procedure, we're going to reinforce the client at the beginning of the chain, the first step, right? So if we look at our chain, we have open fridge, grab ingredients, toast bread, put ingredients on bread, slice sandwich, eat. Well, what's the first step? Open fridge. When are you going to reinforce the client? After they open the fridge. Then you're going to prompt through the rest. Once they learn the first step, you're going to teach first and second, so on and so forth. If you're conducting a forward chain procedure, after they open the fridge, they'll get reinforcement. Again, we need to not forget about the easy material. It's just as important. A baseball coach wants to use a measurement procedure that would allow him to monitor who is and isn't engaged in batting practice without having to observe batting practice continuously. What type of measurement might you recommend? Careful with these, right? So we don't want to measure continuously. We don't want to have to observe continuously. Immediately, we're going to eliminate all continuous measurements. Duration, rate, frequency, IRT, latency, throw them out, right? We're not continuously measuring. Now, be careful here. Okay, because if we look at B, C, and D, we have discontinuous measurements, partial, whole, and momentary. But what is the stipulation? What does the coach want to do? He wants to be able to monitor without having to observe continuously. Just because partial and whole aren't considered continuous measurements doesn't mean we don't still need to observe continuously. Think about if I'm doing a partial interval measurement system. I need to watch the learner the entire time to record whether the behavior happens or not. Same with whole interval. I need to record or watch the learner the entire time to measure, does that behavior happen the entire interval or not? So although it's not considered continuous measurement, I still need to observe the learner practically the entire time. Momentary time sampling, however, we don't. Why is that? Because with momentary time sampling, what we're doing is we're setting an interval. We can go do what we need to do. And at the very end of that interval, we check on our learners or our learner, and we record whether they're engaged in the activity or not. In this case, the coach does not have to watch batting practice. He can go do whatever else he needs to do. At the end of the interval, he can come back, and when that interval is over, he can check on his players and see who is and isn't engaged. Again, just because it's not continuous measurement doesn't mean we don't need to observe them continuously, right? Partial and whole, you still need to watch the learner to see if they're doing the behavior or not. Momentary time sampling, you don't, because you're only worried about the end of that interval. So what type of measurement might you recommend? Probably momentary time sampling. Analyze the graph below. What is most likely maintaining Brian's behavior? All right, kind of a trickier question, okay, but we're going to go through it. If we look at the graph, what is your first instinct? What is happening? You should immediately think functional analysis, right? We have these conditions: contingent attention, contingent tangible, contingent escape, and our control of free play. Free play, we're getting all the reinforcement we want. If we look at this graph of frequently inappropriate behavior, what do we notice about what is maintaining Brian's behavior? Well, let's look at each condition. Contingent attention, the frequency of inappropriate behavior gets very high, and then it kind of maintains in the middle, but it happens pretty consistently. Contingent escape gets up to about 75 and then hangs out around the middle. Contingent tangible gets up to about 80 and again hangs out around the middle. We notice free play, nothing happens, right? So the behavior occurs in the attention condition, it occurs in the escape condition, and it occurs in the tangible condition. What do you notice about what is missing? Well, we're not running an alone condition. If we're not running an alone condition, we can safely assume we don't believe it's automatic reinforcement, because automatic reinforcement occurs typically when someone's alone or with no social mediation. If we're not running an alone condition, there's no reason to believe that it's automatic. So we can eliminate B. However, the behavior is happening in all these other conditions. So what is maintaining it? Well, all three, right? It's happening in attention, so Brian's engaging in for attention. It's happening for escape. Brian's engaging when it's contingent on escape. And it's happening to gain access. Brian's doing it to gain access to a tangible. So if we look at A, attention and access to tangibles, yes, but we're missing escape. B, automatic reinforcement. We just said there's no alone condition, right? So it's not automatic. C, attention, access, and escape. Yes, it's happening at all three. And then D, cannot determine. Well, we can say it's multiple function, right? Controlled by multiple functions. Our answer is going to be C. This is straight from Cooper, the white book. I don't recommend the white book for rote studying. I do recommend the white book, the Cooper book, for graphs. They have the best graphs and the most explanatory graphs you're going to find. Spend a little time going through that white book looking at the graphs. This graph is straight from Cooper, and it's going to give you an explanation of why this answer is correct, okay? The white book is dense. It's a lot of information. It's hard to study from rotely. Again, use it for the graphs, okay? It's a great source for all different types of experimental design graphs, functional analysis graphs, the list goes on and on. As a supervisor, when you notice that your staff are implementing treatment plans correctly and measuring behavior accurately, validly, and reliably, what should you make sure and do? Interesting. What is this question talking about? What is it saying? It's saying you're a supervisor and you see your staff are doing what they're supposed to do, implementing treatment plans with fidelity correctly, and they're measuring behavior correctly with accuracy, validity, and reliability. What do we need to do then? Well, first things first, we want to make sure they continue doing what they're supposed to do, right? We need them to continue implementing with fidelity and measuring correctly. So what do we need to do? A, provide praise to the staff on more frequent intervals. Very careful with A. Why? Does A tell us anything about praise as it relates to how it affects staff behavior? No. We don't know if praise is a reinforcer. We don't know if it's a punisher. Consider a staff member who could care less about praise and wants more money. Is praise going to maintain the behavior? No, it's not a reinforcer, right? B, only monitor performance as to not disrupt fidelity. Well, certainly want to monitor, okay, but we still want to figure out why, right? We don't want to just sit here and do nothing, okay? Because what happens? Treatment drift, observer drift, all these things can take place if we're not maintaining this great behavior. C, give the staff raises. Same issue with A. Maybe somebody thinks they're making enough money and they want a trip to Disney World, right? The staff raise is not going to maintain or reinforce that behavior. You got to be very careful. If it doesn't explicitly state that this stimuli is reinforcing or punishing, you can't assume that it's reinforcing or punishing. So before we start doing these consequence interventions, we need to do what? We need to determine what is maintaining the staff's behavior. Why is this happening? Why are they motivated? What is reinforcing? On and on, right? That's the first thing we need to do after we notice things are going great, okay? So before we start trying to praise and raise and monitor, let's determine why is it happening. Then, right, we can create a plan. You ate 3 donuts this morning for breakfast. What dimensional quantity of behavior is being measured? Key here is dimensional quantity. What are our 3-dimensional quantities? Repeatability, temporal locus, and temporal extent. We derive our measurements from this. The test will try to trick you by saying dimensional quantity and then throwing out all the measurements, okay? If we're talking dimensional quantities, we're only talking repeatability, temporal locus, temporal extent. Meaning, throw out rate, throw out frequency. They're gone, okay? They're derived from dimensional quantities. So if you ate 3 donuts for breakfast, what do? Did we measure how long it took you to eat? Did we measure time in between donuts? Or did we count? We counted, right? It's repeatability. Repeatability has to do with count, frequency, etc. Temporal locus is things like IRT and latency. If we knew how long in between the donuts you were eating, we would have temporal locus, but we don't. We just have a count, right? We're just measuring repeatability. So again, the important part here is looking at dimensional quantity and understanding dimensional quantities are repeatability, temporal locus, and temporal extent. We derive rate, frequency, latency, IRT, and duration from those dimensional quantities. Very careful. Words matter on the exam, to a massive extent, right? Words make a difference. And what I mean by that is you have to pay attention to what they're saying and what they're asking. Everything they do and everything they say and everything they write is for a reason, right? So understand that, okay, on the exam. Go slow. Take the words seriously. Jessica and Alan conduct an experiment analyzing the effects of parental praise and reprimands on the development of adolescent mans and tax. Jessica and Alan replicate the intervention in the experimental setting several times before sharing their results. What are Jessica and Alan most likely testing for? Why would we replicate an intervention? Well, think about a withdrawal design. A withdrawal design, we're going to start with a baseline, implement an intervention, go back to baseline, and try to find a functional relationship. If we do it again and we go back to intervention and we still see a change, we're further proving functional relationships or experimental controls. The more we do it, the more success we have, the stronger we can say our experimental control is. If Jessica and Alan are replicating their intervention in the experimental setting, what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to find or demonstrate or prove experimental control. Experimental setting is also a hint to avoid external validity, because external validity is saying they're trying to generalize it. If Jessica and Alan were going around replicating their intervention across all different settings and types, that might be external validity. But since it's in the experimental setting, they're looking for internal validity. They're looking to demonstrate functional control. They're not looking for B credibility. That's not a phrase, right, we would use to describe this, right? Does functional control give their study more credibility? Maybe, right? But it's not something we're assuming here. And then multiple treatment interference. Multiple treatment interference is the result, the change in behavior as a result of multiple treatments or another treatment added to the experiment, right? They're looking at the same intervention over and over again, right? They don't have multiple treatments coming in this one design, okay? It's one intervention replicated many, many times, trying to prove experimental control. What are Jessica and Alan most likely testing for? C, internal validity. The Premack principle is based on what idea? All right, we have a term, let's define it. What is the Premack principle? Premack principle says we can use the opportunity to engage in a response or an activity contingent on engaging in a lower probability or less preferred response or activity, also known as Grandma's Law. Clean your plate, you get to eat ice cream. Help me sweep, you can play video games. Premack principle. It's almost the opposite of the low P, high P sequence, right? Or the high P, low P sequence, I should say. Almost, okay? Premack principle is based on what idea? Well, it's not the high probability sequence. They're not the same thing, okay? People get these confused. They're different. Premack principle says first you engage in that low probability activity or response. Then you get to engage in the high probability activity, okay? High probability sequence says first you engage in these high probability requests, and then I ask you the low probability request. Okay, it's not A. It's clearly not C, methodological behaviorism, okay? And it's not scheduled thinning because we're not thinning any schedules. The Premack principle is based on the response deprivation hypothesis. I deprive you of the ability to engage in a response and use that deprivation as motivation to increase the value of the response after you engage in the response I want to see. Premack principle, very basic, very elementary, but very effective, very important. Okay, know what the pre-map principle is. It's based on the idea of the response deprivation hypothesis. Which of the following basic reinforcement schedules commonly produce post-reinforcement pauses? Think about post-reinforcement pauses, right? What would a post-reinforcement pause look like? Well, it would be when you receive reinforcement and you stop responding for a set amount of time, right? I've got my reinforcement. I'm going to wait, and then I'll start responding again. Why might that happen? Well, typically, if you can predict when reinforcement is coming, that's when it's going to occur. I'm in an FR 5, let's say. I do 5 responses. I get my reinforcement. I know I have to engage in 5 more responses, so I might just hang out a little bit before starting to engage again. When we do a variable schedule, it's less likely to occur because we don't know when reinforcement is coming. If I'm on a VR3, I might get reinforcement after 5 responses, but then the next time I might get it after 2. So I'm going to consistently respond. Post-reinforcement pauses is usually a result of a fixed schedule. So A, FR and VR, well, we just said why it's not VR. B, FR and VI. It's not VI for the same reason it's not VR, right? We're not really sure when reinforcement is coming. We have to keep responding. C, VR and VI, absolutely not, right? They're both variable. D is going to be our best answer. Fixed schedules typically lead to these post-reinforcement pauses. I get my reinforcement, I pause, and then I rapidly respond, get it again, pause, rapidly respond, so on and so forth. Answer here is D. A conjunctive schedule is a combination of what basic reinforcement schedules? Conjunctive schedule says both of these basic schedules must be completed to receive reinforcement. But there are 2 specific types of basic reinforcement schedules involved in a conjunctive schedule. Is it a ratio and a ratio? It is not. It is B, a ratio and an interval. So a conjunctive schedule, by the law, by the letter of the law, I should say, from the Cooper book, says a conjunctive schedule is a combination of a ratio and an interval schedule. Both a ratio, both an interval and an interval schedule must be completed in order to gain reinforcement. It's not C, interval and interval, and it's not D, any combination. It has to be a strict, by definition, conjunctive schedule. It has to be a combination of a ratio and an interval schedule. Okay, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Be sure to check out all of our study materials at bcbastudy.com. We offer 3 full practice exams, 5th edition task list study guide. Our combo pack now comes with flashcards. It's our best deal. We also offer tutoring. Questions, comments, please let me know. Have an excellent, fantastic weekend, holiday weekend. Be safe. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for Let's Learn ABA. And then Monday, we'll get some more RBT questions. And next Friday and Saturday, more BCBA questions. So be on the lookout for that. As always, questions, comments, let me know.